If you collapsed in the heart of the wild, surrounded by silence, would anything come to save you? James never thought he'd be afraid of quiet. After years serving in combat zones, silence should have been a gift. But when he came home, it became his enemy. It wasn't the explosions or the screaming he missed. It was the certainty, the structure, the mission. Back home, there were no missions, just days that dragged and nights that never seemed to end. Most people didn't notice the war still living inside him. He smiled politely at the store, nodded to neighbors, said, "I'm fine," when asked. But at night, when the world went still, the silence would fill with echoes, flashes of memory, whispers of loss, things he couldn't outrun. Doctors offered solutions, pills, appointments, support groups. He tried, but nothing reached the part of him that had gone quiet. Then came the box. A simple wooden beehive delivered by a local veteran outreach program. No instructions, just a note. Sometimes healing comes with wings. He stared at it for hours. What did bees have to do with trauma? He almost gave it away. Almost. But something about the hum, faint, constant, alive, drew him in. So, one morning, he suited up, trembling hands fumbling with gear, and opened the hive. What he found wasn't chaos. It was order. Thousands of tiny beings working together in silence. No shouting, no confusion. Just purpose. And for the first time in years, James felt like he could breathe. This is not a story about war. It's a story about what happens after. About how healing sometimes doesn't come in words, but in the rhythm of wings, in the patience of nature, in the presence of something smaller than your pain, but stronger than your silence. This is the story of a soldier and a bee. His name was James Whitaker. He grew up in a small Midwestern town where cornfields met endless skies and patriotism was stitched into the fabric of childhood. He enlisted in the military at 19, bright-eyed and full of purpose. He left home with a salute. He came back with a silence no one could quite understand. There were no bandages when he returned, no visible wounds. But something had changed in his eyes, a quiet heaviness, like he was always listening for sounds that weren't there. He had served 2 tours overseas, places his family could barely pronounce, let alone imagine. And though he had survived the war, parts of him didn't come back. He avoided crowds, flinched at sudden noise. He stopped answering the phone. His world became smaller. His days became a loop. Coffee, pacing, staring out the window, then trying and failing to sleep. "I'm just tired," he'd say when his sister asked. But the truth was, James felt hollow. As if the war had stripped everything that once made him feel human, his sense of control, his trust in peace, even his connection to joy. The VA hospital gave him a diagnosis, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It was a label, and in some ways, a relief. At least now there was a name for the storm he carried. But names didn't fix things. He tried therapy, he tried the medication. He went to group meetings and sat among strangers who wore the same expression he did: tired, guarded, trying. And then he stopped trying. Until the morning the box arrived. A wooden hive sealed shut with the faintest buzzing from within. No warning, no expectations. Just that handwritten note. Sometimes healing comes with wings. He didn't know it then, but this box would become a turning point, not because it spoke or offered solutions, but because inside it lived something more ancient than war, more loyal than memory, and more consistent than pain. Tiny creatures who didn't know trauma, didn't ask questions, didn't expect explanations. They just did what they were made to do. And somehow, that simple rhythm would start to bring James back to life. The first time James opened the hive, his hands were trembling so much he nearly dropped the lid. The suit they gave him was too snug. The gloves felt clumsy. Every part of him screamed, "Don't do this!" But the buzzing drew him in like a whisper, not threatening, not angry, just present. He stood there for a long moment, frozen in place, watching tiny wings blur past his face. His breath caught. This wasn't like a movie, no slow-motion drama or heartwarming swell of music. It was raw, real, alive. He slowly lifted the lid, expecting an explosion of wings, of chaos, but what he saw instead stopped him cold. Inside that wooden box was order. Thousands of bees moving with perfect synchronicity, each one knowing exactly where to go, what to do. No confusion, no panic, just focus. There were workers fanning the hive with their wings. Others lined up at the entrance like tiny guards. A few moved deep inside, vanishing into the honeycomb dark, while others buzzed out into the sunlight again. James didn't know what he expected, but it wasn't this. He felt like a trespasser at first, an outsider stepping into something sacred, but the bees didn't seem to mind. They didn't fly at him in defense. They didn't care who he was or where he'd been. They just worked. And for a man who had spent the last few years feeling useless, invisible, and broken, that meant something. He found himself returning to the hive the next day, and the next. He didn't even realize it was becoming routine. He would bring a stool and sit nearby, just watching. Sometimes an hour passed before he moved. He didn't think. He didn't relive anything. He just was. The hive became his sanctuary. There were no forced conversations, no clinical forms to fill, no need to explain how he felt or why he couldn't sleep. Just the steady hum of wings, the warmth of sunlight, the scent of wildflowers dancing in the air. He began noticing things he never used to like, how bees signal with a waggle dance, how they take turns feeding the queen, how they grieve when one of their own dies. In their world, every life had value, every action had meaning. And that was the first time James let the thought enter his mind. Maybe I still matter too. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but something had shifted. He was no longer just surviving the silence. He was starting to find peace inside it. And it all began with the wings of a creature so small, the world often forgets how powerful it truly is. Healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or sudden revelation. Sometimes it creeps in quietly like sunlight slipping through a crack in the wall you didn't know was there. That's how it happened for James. One morning, after weeks of visiting the hive, he realized he had slept through the night. No waking up in a cold sweat. No flashbacks. Just sleep. It felt strange at first, like forgetting to carry your rifle in a war zone. He sat up in bed and looked around, confused by the absence of fear. Then he smiled. A small smile, almost reluctant but real. He started sleeping more, eating better. The nightmares, while not completely gone, lost their grip on him. Each morning, he returned to the hive like a ritual. He began journaling what he saw, the behavior of the bees, the weather, the bloom cycle of nearby flowers. But somehow, the pages began to shift. He wasn't just writing about the bees anymore. He was writing about himself. About the days he felt lighter, the days that were still hard, the thoughts he didn't dare say out loud to anyone, except the bees. He called them his quiet counselors. They didn't give advice. They didn't interrupt. But in their rhythm, he found permission to breathe again. As weeks turned into months, James transformed in ways even he didn't fully notice. He started taking care of his garden again, planting native flowers and herbs the bees seemed to like. He stopped turning down visits from his sister. He even hosted a barbecue where he surprised everyone with jars of his own raw honey. His hands, once only steady in combat, now moved gently, harvesting, bottling, labeling. Each jar carried more than sweetness. It carried his return. But the most telling sign came from the way he began helping others. One afternoon, a neighbor's son, a quiet, anxious boy named Eli, wandered into James's yard, mesmerized by the buzzing. James showed him the hive. He taught him how bees talk with dances, how they can fly miles just to bring one drop of nectar home. Eli listened, eyes wide, and asked shyly, "Are they your friends?" James thought for a moment, then replied, "They're more than that. They remind me who I am." Word spread. A local support group invited James to speak. At first, he said no, but eventually he agreed under one condition: he wouldn't talk about war. He would talk about bees. So he stood in front of a small room of veterans, most of them silent and distant, like he once was. And he told them a story, not of battles or survival, but of wings, of mornings filled with golden light, of how healing can come not from fixing yourself, but from witnessing something else live freely. By the time he finished, there were no standing ovations, no applause. But 3 men asked him if he'd show them the hive. He did, and the circle quietly grew. James never became famous. He never wrote a book, never gave a TED Talk, never went viral. But in a quiet corner of his backyard, where wildflowers now bloomed freely and the hive stood strong beneath an old oak tree, something extraordinary had taken root not just in the soil, but in his soul. Healing, he realized, was never about forgetting. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending the pain never happened. It was about making space for something else to grow alongside it. In the hum of the bees, James found what the battlefield had taken from him: stillness, trust, and purpose. They never asked who he had been. They only responded to who he chose to be right now. Some afternoons he would sit by the hive and just listen. No talking, no thinking, just the wings. The world around him had changed too. His yard had become a small sanctuary, not just for pollinators, but for people. Veterans, children, neighbors. Each one drawn by the same thing: the quiet magic of life continuing, no matter what it had endured. One day, Eli, the boy next door, left a note on James's porch. It was scrawled in messy handwriting, taped to a small jar of honey James had given him weeks earlier. The note read, "I don't feel scared when I'm here. I think the bees make my heart feel brave." James read it slowly, eyes softening. He didn't need more than that. That one line was enough. And this is what nature teaches us: that healing doesn't have to be loud, that even the smallest lives can spark the greatest changes, that you don't have to save the whole world sometimes. Showing up for one living thing is more than enough. And perhaps the most powerful truth of all: even after war, after silence, after all that was lost, life still finds a way to hum again. This is the story of a man and a hive. But more than that, it's the story of how nature never gives up on us, even when we've given up on ourselves. If this story touched something inside you, if you've ever felt broken, unheard, or invisible, just know this: you're not alone. And sometimes healing starts in the smallest places, with a wing beat, a breath, or a story like this. Leave a comment below and tell us what helped you begin to heal. Was it nature, a pet, a person, a moment of unexpected stillness? Your words might be the light someone else needs to see today. If you believe in the quiet power of nature to heal the human heart, comment to show you're part of this hive. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder. They still matter. Their story isn't over. And like James, maybe their healing is already on its way in ways they never expected. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, healing, and the natural world. Together, let's listen to the earth. Let's remember, we are all connected. This isn't just a channel. This is a movement, and you are a part of it.